I'm here today with Emma. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Andy.
Now, we got to know each other a little bit because of Karen Ferguson and the Maven Club. So we're on the network. I always forget the name. Is it the Comms Crew or the
Uh,
Growth Crew?
the Growth Crew,
The
isn't it?
Growth Crew. That was it. I always get the because Nathan's all my graphics guy. He's on it as well, a different crew. So I get myself thrown a little bit. So it's great
Yeah.
to meet you on there, and it's wonderful to meet new people. But let me get this right. So you are Star Recovery. Have I got that name right?
Yes, completely
Yes.
stands for Steps to Active Recovery, but we call it STAR.
Cool. Okay, I got that right. Always good. Just give us a really brief overview. What is Star all about?
Well, we're living in a crisis around addiction, nationally, globally, and coming at it from a Christian perspective, we see that the church and volunteer teams can actually make a difference to the culture of addiction. And when I say addiction, it's destructive habits, compulsive behaviors. We live in a nation where we are programmed to be addicted. So we basically just upskill, upskill churches and teams to be able to step in and help people, much like myself back in the day, to be able to live a life of freedom and ultimately help them to Star is what led people to Jesus, and we love to do that in what we do in a beautiful way, and mobilize the church.
I hadn't thought of the star and Jesus and the birth and all that. I hadn't thought about that. That's really cool.
There's also that starfish analogy with a little boy on a beach picking up starfish and throwing them back into the sea, and the old man says, why are you doing that? You're not going to make a difference. And the guy, the little boy throws another and looks at the man and says, well, it made a difference to that one. And that's what we always want to hold on to. We have a big vision of impacting 1 million lives through the existence of our charity. But if it's just about one person finding hope out of the carnage of addiction, our job is done.
Yeah, which I love that story with the starfish. I've used that one once or twice. When you're thinking, well, what's the point in doing this? There's so many people we're not helping, but whilst possibly true, we don't know how many people we are actually helping really, but there is that one that we are helping, and that has to be worthwhile, doesn't it?
Yeah, because Jesus came for the one, didn't he? And each of us, and ultimately that's what we want to do and what we do.
Awesome. Um, so you're talking about addiction. Let's just try and because I know we've got different audiences around the world. I think of addiction. I think most people would probably think immediately drug addiction, which would be a pretty obvious one. Maybe we might stretch to perhaps alcohol addiction, but of course, addiction's much wider than just those two, perhaps more generally thought of addictions.
Well, let me throw something into the mix that might challenge people. I mean, have you ever looked to rent a house or buy a house? There's an app in the UK called Rightmove.
Yeah.
Uh, I know, well, there was an article recently about a lady addicted to Rightmove. And you might laugh at that, but actually it was her waking thought. It was everything she did throughout the day. She didn't even have enough money to rent somewhere, but she was addicted to it. Like through the pandemic, the news,
Hmm.
people started like getting completely obsessed. It's when an unhealthy obsession comes. I've had people addicted to biting their nails, robbed them of their whole honeymoon because they couldn't bite their nails in private, and ruined what was meant to be the most beautiful time of their life with their new partner. People addicted to cross stitch, a little old lady, gripped her husband of 50 years thinking of divorcing her because of it. Social media. Look at if I took everybody's phone away from them now just for what, 1 hour, I guarantee the anxiety people would feel, and this is the culture we're in. Most people have something in their lives that they have an unhealthy habit with.
I was chatting to someone just today who is trying to break a habit, I guess, in their life. It's an addiction, possibly not necessarily. I don't know how you want to define that. But I remembered a fact I'd heard that it takes 6 repetitions to form a habit, and it takes 6 weeks of not doing that thing to break the same habit, which is why prevention is always better than a cure.
Exactly. And it's funny because people with addictive natures, like myself, you can form habits very quickly, but I do believe they can actually reverse that quickly as well. But it is, yeah, it's a cycle, isn't it? And it's hard to break a habit. But if somebody's come to you saying that they're not happy about something, that would indicate that there's a problem. But the problem we have is that the word addiction brings up all this stigma and fear and connotations that many people do not want to go down that route because of what they perceive addiction to be. And actually, most of us have it.
I remember reading somewhere a little while ago now, so I can't remember the source, but it was somebody who was quite senior at Instagram before it became Meta, and it was one of the senior execs, and as they left, bit of a whistleblowing moment, they said, look, you need to understand Instagram at that time, she said, I'm stating this, not me personally, that it is designed to be addictive. It is designed to make you never leave it, which from a business point of view makes sense. Same in Rightmove or whatever app it might be. If it's a business, they want you to stay on their app. Well, of course they do, because advertising, money, all that. Yeah. But how do they do that? Well, they have to entice you. Hence algorithms that try and show you what you want to see, which creates a distorted word view, of course, but then it helps you to stay on it. That's just social media.
It might be a bit old school now, Facebook, but I still use Facebook. And, you know, it's the actual designers of Facebook. They publicly said that it was, you know, like with Instagram, made to be addictive. Every single like, every single comment gives a dopamine hit to the brain, which is dopamine, not a bit or a little, it's dopamine. The same as if someone injects, you know, heroin into their arm or takes a drink or gambles excessively. It's all the same stuff. It's all in the mind. And this is the thing. And I guess we look more at avoid, you know, not so much the actual habit or the substance, but actually what is it that's driving people to that? And ultimately, normally it's pain in one way, shape or form in life.
I guess that's probably why it's easy to say, oh, addiction, well, that's just for drug addicts and alcohol addicts. You know, that's fine, because we can see perhaps more obviously the direct negative consequences. But I mean, you just talked about an old lady who's cross-stitched, whose husband, 50 years, that's enough, because it's not the thing necessarily. I mean, that can be more destructive, I guess, more complicated, but it's the actual fact of being addicted, which then causes so many other issues, because in a society, we need interaction and connections. And if they're constantly being blocked or removed, connections that fail then breeds upset.
And I've got such a passion for, like, you know, dispelling the stigma around addiction, you know, because, you know, I mean, I had some health stuff years ago, and I'm, you know, over 12 and a half years sober now, but on a recovery journey of 18 years. And, you know, I had to have some quite strong medication, but straight away there was a fine line for me whether I was starting to use it excessively or not. And, you know, the pandemic and COVID, you know, online shopping started to feel something in me because of that feeling of isolation. And, you know, and that's really, addiction is such a it's all about isolation and loneliness and being gripped in your own head or in your own physical environment of isolation. So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the post lady became one of my good friends, and I even got to pray with her, which was wonderful. So there's always a blessing amidst the carnage. But, you know, it's difficult times for folk around addiction and destructive habits.
Let's go back in time just a bit for you then. I mean, you're running an organisation, you're talking about faith and Christianity, so that's clearly a part of you now. What was your life like being brought up? I mean, was church, Jesus, God, was that part of your growing up, or was that something that came later?
No, it was from day one, really. My mother is an amazing Christian lady. And funnily enough, I used to go to church, quite a traditional Church of England church in Somerset and then Wales when we moved. And I was even in the choir, and I'd be a right little tearaway. But I used to always offer to clean the goblet of wine at the end of the service. So I did have a Christian upbringing, and you know, there was an element of it being given to me, and later on in life, I discovered it and the relationship with Jesus myself, which was, you know, the biggest gift I've ever been given. So, you know, as well as recovery, and I remember I used to live next door to a vicar, and he used to go away a lot, and I'd always offer to feed his cat. But it wasn't because I love animals. Probably one of my addictions is to animals, like in how much I love them. But I used to offer to feed his cat. I'd go over, and only because I knew he had the most excessive wine cellar. So I would go into his wine cellar, and I would drink his red wine and fill it up with Ribena. and this is as a kid, but I always felt quite different, disconnected. There was a lot of life stuff that happened. Funnily enough, my dad used to work for Guinness, but he left when I was tiny, ran off with his secretary, and my mum did an amazing job trying to bring me and my brother up. But me and my brother both fell into the trap of addiction.
I mean, that's coming back to what you said right at the beginning. There's pain somewhere. We don't just think, oh, hey, look, I'm bored. Let's get an addiction going. That's not how this works. There's always a trigger of some sort. My wife's said for years, people don't just suddenly, because you've read up on it, they don't suddenly get arrested for burglaries. I mean, that's not how it works. There's a whole set of it. And when you get the burglar that actually is arrested for a burglary, okay, there's 300 of them, or whatever it is. So there's always a journey, isn't there, to that addiction beginning.
There is, and like doing work on myself today, I don't blame any of that, but I can see how it has a big impact. And I think deep down, I just didn't have the ability to cope with life. So of course, you reach out to something or somebody to try and fill that, and for me, it was food at the age of 11. And I went through the whole spectrum of eating disorders from the age of 11 up until, early 20s. But I found alcohol at the age of 13 and it just did something to me. It took away my inhibitions. It made me feel like I fitted in. It made me feel like I had love to give out and all the things that I was struggling with in my own character. And ultimately looking back now, I know that wasn't what Jesus wanted in my life, but I just turned to it. And there was a lot of external factors that helped it to happen.
I think it's interesting about the alcohol because, of course, it's a muscle relaxant. It can be a very, very useful thing. It can help you with your heart. There's some really good benefits to it. But of course, like anything that can be good, there can be something that's not so good.
Oh, completely. And, I'm not going to sit here and say that it was all doom and gloom. I had a lot of fun and, it was social for an element. But the more you do it and the reason I was drinking was not for enjoyment, it was to block out things. And there came a point where I felt like I couldn't live with it, but I couldn't live without it. And that was a very dark, lonely time. I wanted to, I thought about suicide a lot. Just wanted to be out of this world because I didn't understand the world I was in. So yeah, it got really messy, really messy. And I think for me, university was probably the catalyst. I'd been a heavy drinker, but I was suddenly immersed in an environment where you're kind of like, if you didn't drink, you were odd. And it was just like a playground for my character. And I ended up like really going for it at university. And it makes me laugh because I met a pastor several years back who said that students don't have addiction, and then a week later, one of the young people fell out of a window because they were drunk. And you know what I mean? It can affect so many people. I'm very passionate about young people, and the messages they get these days. But university was just like a catalyst to what was happening. And then you'll laugh because I was actually quite well educated, and that was one of the things I managed to still do even amidst all the carnage of addiction. And I went to Cardiff University, and they offered me all these different degrees, and I had an excuse for everything. And that's a pattern of my life, is having an excuse to not follow something good. And I got offered business studies. I was like, no, that's too clever. Sports recreation, no, that's too energetic. And then they told me hospitality management. And I was like, I do not have a clue what that is. And I asked the lecturer, and he said, oh, there's wine tasting on a Friday. And I just signed up to a 4-year degree based on that decision. But at that point, I didn't know I had a problem.
So that's where you go to university. You've already got something going on in your life, and of course, it's like a Pandora's box. There's no rules, there's no boundaries unless you put them in place. Which is why I know a lot of particularly Christian parents will be frantically trying to prepare their children for university life, and sometimes it doesn't work because they're trying to restrict them from experiencing life rather than helping them to be ready for life, which is a completely different thing. I've seen so many children in Christian families who've just completely gone off on one because they've been restricted from everything. And when they actually aren't being restricted because the parents
Yeah.
aren't there, now it goes wild because they've not really been taught how to deal with having a drink of a night. When you come home, have a glass of water. No hangover in the morning. Well, if you don't teach that, how does someone know? So we've always had an open thing with our own kids. If they wanted a bit of wine, fine, because I was told no, and I was drinking underage because I looked very old and I could buy a pint in the pub, and no one even questioned me. People at 15 thought I was 25. So, it's easy enough to get addicted because you just want some either to fit in or to escape.
Oh, exactly. And I've heard more that the young people there's a lot of people that aren't drinking these days, but
Hmm.
I think the universities and things have to catch up with that and provide fun things that aren't all around drink. But then I'll be honest, and this is a bit controversial, but I can go into a lot of different churches and it's still all focused around drink. And that's one of my bugbears. We're not really protecting our weaker brothers and sisters, are we?
No, I mean, in a similar way, we went to a church. Oh, do you want to come out one night? We're going out for a meal, going out to see a concert. I remember my wife and I thinking, we haven't got the money. And everything in that church was about going out for a drink, for a food, for a thing. And it's the thing after the thing and the thing to get there. And it's just, you're spending 300-400 quid a night. And we are not spending that a year on the same stuff, and it's a different world sometimes. And yeah, it's a bugbear of mine, slightly different, not from the drinking perspectives, but you almost need to have money in order to go to church, which I know isn't true. And it's a very massive sweeping generalization. But I've been in churches the last 40 years and it seems to be, I think you might say the same with the alcohol, but it seems to be fairly synonymous.
Yeah, yeah, not all, but a lot. And things have to change. Yeah.
Amen to that. So, university, you've still got this stuff going on with addiction that's now grown and I guess blossomed, not in a healthy way. What was your route out? I mean, I'm guessing there's a point at which you thought, oh, this isn't good.
Well, I'd love to say I finished uni and then was on the right path. I wasn't. I ended up running nightclubs abroad, as from what I'd learned, and that got even darker in a different country, predominantly Muslim country, and very corrupt, the area I was in, and it just, yeah, it was hard. But I managed to get back to the UK, and I realised when I got back that I was dependent on alcohol, and I tried several times to stop, crying out to Jesus, and I started like just begging for people and God to help me, but I wasn't helping myself either. I was so stuck in that cycle. And I ended up at my worst, drinking about 2 litres of vodka a day. I'd had car accidents. I was unemployable. I look back at a picture from myself from back then, and I don't even recognise that 28-year-old girl really that has just been gripped by mess. And thankfully, my mum, she'd been a pharmacist all her life, and it's expensive to go into treatment these days, and there's very little support out there. But I was given a grant to go to a rehab in Wiltshire, and I just thank God every day for the fact that when I walked, I say walked in, I was carried in. It was a 12-step rehab, so connected to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which originates from the Bible, from a Christian perspective. So when it had these 12 steps which encompass God, I was like, I know who that is, but I don't know who that is, if that makes sense. I was like, I've been brought up with a lot of knowledge, a lot of, but actually it was an opportunity for me to start this journey of getting to know, or allowing God to get to know me more in a way, and for me to meet him in that. And that for me, yes, I was able to put down the drink through the help of medication, but actually it was getting to know Jesus was, and that was, gosh, that's now, like I said, about 18 years ago. And that was the start of my recovery journey. And I'd love to say that I've been sober ever since. I haven't, sadly, not sadly, actually, relapse was a part of my story. I believe that, the battles can become blessings in that sense. And but that's when I first got sober.
So you're now seeing the life differently. I guess you could say that you knew more about Jesus than you knew of Jesus. You sort of knew facts and figures. You could sing the songs, you could clean the goblet, but you know, and you knew how to stand in the church, when to stand up and sit down, which
Yeah.
page you're on maybe in the book, but there's more to it than that, because it's not just about what we do, it's about who we know.
Exactly. And I think, I didn't even know. It's like my eyes suddenly became open and realized there was more. It wasn't just out of a book or stories. It was, which of course the Bible is so important, but for me it was like, oh my gosh, there's somebody that I can actually, I did a lot of healing work actually, after a few years of sobriety, and realized I see Jesus more like my brother. I've never had a father figure, so understanding God as a father was incredibly hard, because I had nothing to compare it to apart from what I saw other people experiencing. And there was a lot of loss, a lot of abandonment. And yeah, so it was a beautiful, just starting from scratch, and it's funny because I remember in that very first evening after the detox had happened in this rehab, and I said a prayer. I said, God, if you can help me to get through this and to live a life sober, I will do anything to help people. And I didn't realize the power of that prayer, because funnily enough, there was probably about 35 people in that rehab, and all of them were saying they want to be counselors or, drug specialists and that, and which is great for those that do that. But for me, I was like, I am never, ever, ever working in addiction. And I was adamant, and I fought it and fought it and fought it. But like we'll talk a bit later, but God had a different plan. And that's been my experience. He uses some of the biggest, what we perceive as our weaknesses and the things that scare us the most, and flips them completely around so that we can, he works all things together for good. And as I grew to love him, that's been my experience. I used to be so petrified to be in a room of more than two people. If you'd have asked me to do an interview or talk to you on Zoom like this, I'd probably have had an anxiety attack back then. And that's how my life was. When I used to do presentations at university, I'd smoke marijuana before just to try and give me some like, in order to do it without being physically sick. And then, he's putting me in positions of speaking to a couple of thousand people at a time sometimes. It's mental. It's mental. I love it, but I love being in awe of what he can do.
Amen to that. So we've got some of your journey then. So 13, the addiction kind of really kicked in. University, it sort of, I suppose, exploded in a sense.
Yeah.
Where did Star come from?
Oh gosh, well, when I got sober, I'd love to say like I stayed sober, but I didn't. I ended up drinking again 12 and a half years ago, and that was carnage. I ended up on probation. I ended up, looking at potentially a custodial sentence for drink driving. It was very messy, and I left there, and that was the last drink I had, and I kind of made a little promise to myself and to God to just give my all, not to cherry pick parts of recovery, which is what I was doing, and I didn't even know I was doing it, so I got very raw. I kind of started again, and I had a magical moment where I saw Jesus in the flesh, so to speak, and I had this encounter, and basically, I mean, I'll tell you the story because I think it's important, because it's been such a monumentous moment for me. And I always used to hear other people saying they heard a voice or they had a vision and stuff, and I thought, oh, that's lovely for you, but that never happens to me, and I was almost seeking it. And then in this mad moment of my life, probably the best and the worst moment of my life, he shows up. And literally I was 6 weeks sober after this relapse I'd had, and my mum had come to visit me from Wales, and we'd gone to visit Iceland, the country, not the shop. So because someone asked me once if it was a frozen food store, I'd take it. But anyway, we went to Iceland, came back, and we were in my flat in Bournemouth, and we were chatting, and she was about to drive back to Wales, and then she had a sudden cardiac arrest in front of me, and she collapsed on the floor. And I mean, the night before, when we got back from this trip away, my another lady in the house was also 6 weeks sober. We've been talking about the spirit and how God just is there, and God instances, not coincidences. And anyway, my mum's literally dying on the floor, and I ran and got my friend Kim, and she came in, and it was a miracle she was there because it was her birthday, and she should have been at work, but because it was her birthday, she had it off. Anyway, she'd just done her CPR training 2 weeks before. I'm on the phone to the paramedics. We're alternating the CPR on my mum. It took about 8.5 minutes for them to come, which is unheard of these days, bless our NHS. Anyway, the paramedics came and they took over, and they start shocking mum's heart. And all I could do was stand back, and I start praying the Serenity Prayer, which I use in recovery. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this peace just suddenly just fell in the room. It was mental. Absolutely, I keep saying mental. It was mental. And this peace just was there. And in the midst of all the mess, the sounds, the smells, the medicine, the paramedic shocking mum's heart, I just knew it was going to be okay. And the paramedic shocked mum's heart 7 times, I think it was. And then he turned to me and said, "I can't do any more." And this voice came out, and it was my voice, yeah, but it was like amidst all this, and I just went, "Please, can you try one more time?" And looked at him, and but I could also see another person in the room. I can't tell you exactly what this, looked like, and I know it was Jesus, because this peace was only nothing I've ever experienced. And anyway, the paramedic shot mum's heart one more time, and she came back to life.
Wow.
And I got to see that. And it was like opening a channel where I was just like 100% trusting. And sometimes it takes those big moments in our lives, to give our all, because there's nothing else. And literally, I was able to nurse her back to health, and I threw myself into giving back to other people. And I thought, I'm not going to say I can't do this or I can't work in addiction. If God wants me to do that, I'll do it. And not long after that, some people came and spoke about a recovery course in the church. And for me, it was like a cross-shaped hole that suddenly started filling up. It was like I was keeping recovery and faith separate. And in this moment, I knew that the two could come together. And lo and behold, I got involved in this ministry. I started running the course in Bournemouth. It just grew and grew. It was like opening the floodgates. And it was probably the biggest, well, it was known as the biggest recovery course ever known in Britain. And I was leading it. I became a trustee of their charity and started setting up this course around the country. But what I kept seeing was that church teams, a bit like homelessness, when there's a crisis, people open a homeless shelter, which is brilliant, but they don't know how to keep it going. So a bit like these addiction courses, people would put on these addiction courses, but then the teams would get burnt out if they were constantly doing them. And I had this burning heart desire to look after the teams of people with the passion and the strength to work in addiction. So I had this harebrained idea, and I scribbled it all down one day. Ended up being a 26-page document. And I carried it in my handbag, like women have these TARDISes of handbags, this, and it got to the bottom and it got messy and crumpled up. And God just puts people in your path, doesn't he? At just the right time. And I'd shown it to 2 people, and both of them said, "Did you really write this, Emma?" Because I'm not a big writer in that. Well, funnily enough, I'm writing a book at the moment, but I wasn't a big writer. And I met up with this lady, Karen, who you mentioned at the beginning, and Karen Ferguson, and she is involved with concept design and helping ideas come to life. And anyway, it was a real God thing that we met, because it was not to do with that. And then I just said, "Look, I've got this thing. Would you mind having a look at it?" And I sort of crumpled it out of my handbag and gave it to her. And she looked at it and she sort of went, "You know something, Emma, there's something in that." And it was just a model to really support people in the journey of helping others.
Which is stunning. But we need that person, don't we? That one that can come along and say, "This is great," and then try and steer us a little bit more from, I guess, the craziness of what our idea might be at the start. You're thinking, "Oh, this is a bit mad," but actually, in amongst all of those ideas, there's something really beautiful. And I mean, I guess Karen's helped you in
Oh
some
my gosh, she's
measure.
helped me no end. She's a trustee with the charity
Oh,
now,
fab.
and I've never met a lady like her who is so passionate about God, but also so unbelievably professional in how she helps come alongside people and in such a loving way guide you. Because my best thinking used to get me drunk. My best thinking is not how to run a charity. You know what I mean? But you learn, don't you? He equips you, but you need good people like the types of Karen. Um, and I guess I was open to going on that journey, and it's the most beautiful journey in friendship with Karen that I've known.
It's yeah, she's a little bit different, which is great. Let's come back onto Star then. So, what are you actually doing today? And we've got sort of your history and how it began, but what is Star actually doing every day?
Every day. Well, we have an office in Bournemouth. There's 7 of us on the team now, paid, which is that's a miracle in the charity sector today. We basically take a church or a team of people. It doesn't have to be a church. We're working with different Christian organisations. Homeless projects and things. And we take them on a journey of understanding and upskilling in the area of addiction, but we do it in a really gentle, beautiful way. So it's not overly clinical. It's helping a team to go on a journey together. When they've completed their main element of training and upskilling, they get what we call STAR approval. And that just means a bit of a national recognition, so that anyone walking into that church or support group or whatever knows that there's people that have invested in recovery work. That was going to be all that Star was, but we've been going now. In October, we'll have been a charity for 5 years, and
Wow.
it's crazy how it's propelling forward. We now offer resources, so course materials, programs, family support. As Star, we run 2 online courses a year so that anyone can join for free with any habit. We've got one starting on 24th of April or 25th of April. And so people can come. We've got people from all over and further afield as far as Australia join that. And then we also have like a helpline for volunteers, so it takes the pressure off leaders. And oh gosh, there's so much. And some of the most exciting developments, we're starting a mentoring program so people can walk alongside a bit more one-to-one. And also supporting some of the larger Christian festivals, because it's all well and good having great speakers talking about addiction and brokenness. And, obviously I wholeheartedly believe in the power of prayer, but then you have people coming to different environments that are struggling, and there's no actual professional support there for people. So we're going to Creation Fest and Wildfires this year, which is amazing. Taking a team with us there. It's just amazing what God is doing. And all we do is walk alongside teams and give them the confidence, the knowledge and the collaboration to be able to step in and make a difference. And I say that you only need a tiny bit of knowledge to make a difference to someone's life, a bit like with my mum and that CPR story. I only knew a fraction of first aid, but it was enough to step in and save a life. And that's the same with addiction. You don't need to have all the answers or be professionals. You just need the confidence and a good dose of God to support you to be able to step in and change the whole trajectory of someone's walk.
One person at a time. We always think one listener at a time or one reader at a time of the magazine. I don't like to think let's get 1 million people on board. It's that one person, it's that one starfish at a time, because actually, I believe in what we're doing as a radio station. It's really good, wholesome stuff. We're not going to get everyone to switch to our radio station. We're not trying to. We're just trying to provide an option. But actually, I think it's a good option. And I think it's a really pure option, hence the name. But it's trying to get people to think, here's another way of being, and giving them freely to them, which I'm
It's
guessing.
just like Jesus turns his face to ours and gives us peace. It's actually, he invites us to turn our face towards him.
Yeah.
And in whatever shape that might be, whether it's leaving something behind or listening to something that just in that moment is enough to go, you know what, I don't need to do that, or I need to do something differently, or gives you hope. And that's what you do with facilitating conversation, and that's what I hope we do by facilitating support to people that want to help. I've never met people that don't want to help people in addiction. They just don't know how to,
Yeah.
you know.
But that's where I guess your team is going to step in and say, okay, let's give you some information, because it can be quite scary. How are we going to solve the addiction? I don't know how to make up drugs to help people come off addiction. Well, that may well not be your bit, but actually speaking to somebody could be. And how do you speak to somebody sensibly? Well, even that can be quite scary. How do I talk to an alcoholic? Well, they're still people. But having
It's
that
why
little bit of confidence.
we do a lot of work on the words we use, because if you're constantly saying, referring to someone as clean, off of drugs, does that mean that they're unclean if they're on a methadone script? We try and unpack things to make people understand it more. Like I used to say crack on a lot. For some reason, God's convicted my heart, and I can't say it without thinking of something not so healthy. So, it's just learning ways to love people and come to where they're at. And we always perceive it's the person with the problem that has to change to come to where we're at. But actually, I've just been at an amazing conference, Isaac conference, and there was a guest speaker who said about, actually, we need to change where we're at to meet the folk that are struggling.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That last point is brilliant. Where can people get access to your information, your resources, your help? Where do they come to?
Yeah, we've got a website. It's actually been redesigned at the minute, but it's www.starrecovery.org. Everything's on there of how to contact us. We can upskill teams of people for only £20 a month. We felt God just slash our costs, and He's been faithful in that. If people want to support the work we do, they can, come and be a Star supporter. We're looking at some big sort of challenges personally to achieve this year. We want to work with youth and prisons. So there's a lot going on, and God's just sort of putting all the dots together. But people can just contact us. We can arrange an informal kind of like Zoom chat or Teams meeting, and just explain more of what we do. And if it's suitable we've got 2 ladies who are really, elderly ladies who go out every week and help people on the street, and they're coming across addicts all the time. And, they actually became members, the 2 of them together, so we can be creative. We'll work with where people are at, but yeah, it's lovely.
Awesome. Starrecovery.org. If you want more help from Emma and her team, get in touch with them. Thank you for sharing your story. I love hearing, and I say this all the time now because it warms my heart. But you hear someone's story, you hear some of the bad stuff really that's gone on, but then you can see how God's taken all the stuff that isn't great, that they're not necessarily proud of, but God still loved them, and actually He's brought all that stuff through to what you're doing. And now you're able to talk about addiction in a way that I never could, because I don't have any addictions. Of course, we all have some addiction at some level, but actually you've walked through it, you've lived through it, and you've come through it. So when you're talking to people, you can talk in a way that I never could. I mean, I can talk about addiction from a very, very different hypothetical perspective to mostly, but you've lived through it, and more importantly, you've come through it, which is such a critical part. Emma, thank you.
I thank God every day, and it still baffles me how I'm here today and doing what I do, but that's the God of miracles, isn't it?
Amen. Emma, thank you.
Bless you, Andy. Thanks for what you're doing.